Are you thinking about buying a house this year, but your credit score is not where you want it to be? Maybe you made a couple of mistakes in the past and these collections keep nagging you and you're not improving your credit score. Well, in this video, I want to share with you about collections and how it's affecting your score and what really matters so that way you can get over that hump and get yourself into your first home. I hear a lot of our clients that are wanting to buy. One of the biggest reasons that they get held back is that they want a better credit score. And that can come in the form of paying down some debt, getting a higher credit score. Sometimes their credit score is just too low to even buy a house. But so many of you are sitting on the sidelines thinking that you have to have a perfect credit score. Perfect meaning 720, 740, or maybe even above a 700 credit score. That's totally false. You don't need to have a 700 in order to buy. In fact, many lenders will go down to as low as a 580 and still get you financing. At a 580 credit score, you can utilize FHA and VA financing and put 3. Most banks will go down to a 580 credit score, where on an FHA loan, you can still put 3.5% down. And because it's a government loan, your interest rate's not going to be exorbitantly high because you have a lower credit score. It's still very competitive to where the market rate is. Same thing with the VA. VA, you can go down to a 580 credit score and still buy a house with no money down, assuming you have your eligibility and your entitlement to do so. Now, some lenders will even go down to a 500 or 520 credit score. But of course, there's more caveats to doing those types of mortgages. A lot of it's going to be more money down. I know at a previous company that I worked at, we could go to a 520 credit score on FHA, but you had to put 10% down. So usually when we ran into that type of client, they didn't have a vast amount of savings because of where their credit score was. So there's always a catch-22 to everything. You're not going to get the perfect scenario of having bad credit and being able to put a little amount of money down. The lower the score, typically the more money you have to put down in order to get a deal done. But here's the thing with your credit. So a lot of times you're trying to game the system or you're trying to fix things before you talk to a loan officer. But a lot of times with these collections, depending on how old they are, depending on what type of collection they are, it can actually affect your score in a negative way by paying them off. So this is one thing I always stress to clients, that when you're ready to buy a house, talk to a lender first. And the reason you want to do that is because if you go off and you pay a collection, what you're doing is you could potentially lower your credit score. Now, of course, over time, your score is going to rebuild and it's going to come back up and it's going to improve. But in the immediate future, which if your goal in the immediate time, which most people is to buy a house, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Because if you have a collection that's several years old and you go and you pay that thing today, you are now reactivating the trade line to make it more current to the month that you're paying in. And everything with credit is all based on timing. So a credit late that you had 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago has less relevance on your score than a late that you have 30 days ago. It's going to have a huge impact on your score. In fact, I had one client say, well, I didn't know my score is going to go that low when I miss my credit card payment. I mean, first and foremost, if you miss any sort of payment, it's going to affect your score. You have to understand that. And it's going to impact it pretty severely. So you can't take your credit lightly. Like, oh, if I miss a payment, I didn't think it's going to be that bad. Yeah, it's going to be bad. And now you set yourself back. So before you start running out, trying to pay off all your collections, pay off all these other things that might be showing up on your credit, talk to a lender first. Because what we're going to do is take a look at your overall credit situation and see which of those collections do we ignore, which collections have to be addressed, and which collections maybe, if you're willing to pay them, you can pay that at the closing table instead so it doesn't affect your credit score. But if you go run out and pay that collection thinking like, hey, I just paid it off, when you go run to the lender and try to get qualified to buy your house, your score is probably going to drop. And then I always see this happen. Client gets super upset thinking that it's the lender's fault. That's not the lender's fault. That's how the credit system works. So you have to understand the mechanics of what goes on behind the scenes and don't just assume that because you paid off a collection that you're going to get 100 points tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. One thing I also see a lot of people make a mistake on is buying a vehicle. So many of you that are trying to reestablish your credit, the first thing you go run off and do is go buy a car. Yeah, that's great that almost probably any car dealership is willing to give you a loan, but the loan's going to be outrageously expensive. I've heard of some interest rates in the 10, if not 20% range for a car loan. That's just wild to me. But the thing is, once you go create that car loan, depending on where your score is, the car dealership might run your account 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 times So you're going to rack up a ton of credit inquiries on your credit report just to get the car loan. But then now you're thinking, well, hey, if I go buy this car and pay it off in a year, that when a lender looks at it, that's going to be something that I can beat my chest and say, well, look at what I paid off. That's not what we look at as mortgage lenders. What we're looking at is making sure you're on time with all your payments. If you had some lates, if you had some collections, that's okay. We're going to ask you what happened because we understand life happens to people. Sometimes you get laid off of work. Maybe you went through a divorce. Maybe there's a family emergency that you had to deal with, and you know what? I missed one payment. It's not the end of the world. So don't be ashamed of that. I think a lot of times we hide behind our pride and our ego that our credit may not be perfect, so we don't want to talk about it to anybody. But it's totally fine. Trust me, after 15 years of being in this business, I couldn't tell you what the last credit report looked like. We look at it in the moment to see what we need to do to execute on the deal, and we move on. There's nothing that sticks out to me on a credit report that I'm going to remember and I'm going to think about for the rest of my life. So don't be ashamed about your credit. It's something you have to address, especially if it's not where you want it to be. So once we look at your on-time payments, we're looking at all of the minimum payments that are obligated to you on your credit report. We don't care how much you decide to pay towards your credit card or your car payment every month. All we are looking at is the monthly minimum that's reported on the credit report. And a lot of times the credit card payments are fairly low, so it doesn't have a huge impact on your score. But again, if you took out a car loan, which is an installment loan, once you pay that vehicle off, you are no longer reporting anything to the credit bureaus because it's now paid in full. That's why when you get a car vehicle and you pay it off, it doesn't necessarily help you. It's going to hurt you because now you're losing out on the other factors that determine a higher credit score, like length of time and the credit type that you have available, because you want to have a good mix of credit, not just all credit cards or not all installment loans or payday loans. That's another thing you want to stay away from. I had a client once that had 20 payday loans that she paid off on her credit report. Speaking of not remembering stories, this is one I do remember because it was so wild. I had to ask her, she had 20 payday loans. She kept taking out, paying off, kept taking. I was like, why are you doing that? Because she made pretty good money. She's like, well, I wanted to show you that, I'm responsible and I can pay things off and pay them back if I borrow money. I say that's not a good look for a lender because the lender's looking at you're borrowing money from a payday loan company to pay your bills, which means you're overextended at some point. So that's not a good way of establishing credit. What we like to see are secured credit cards, traditional credit cards. If you have an installment loan, that's fine, but stay away from payday loans and stay away from vehicles. Those two will hurt you in the long run on your credit report. And one of the best things that you can rely on is working with a good loan officer, because once we look at your report, we're going to give you the guidance that you need to do the right things with your credit. If for whatever reason on your credit report you need a lot of help, every good loan officer has a good credit repair company that they deal with, so they can always refer you to the professionals. Let them work with you directly in order to help get everything dialed in the way it needs to be. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid of any of the mistakes that maybe you made in the past, because we all know when we were younger, we made some foolish decisions if we had a credit card or maybe we had some money back in the day. But it's okay. Let the past be the past, and let's figure out ways that we can strategize together to clean up the credit, get you in a position so you're not making wrong choices, assuming you're doing something to help your credit when in fact you're only hurting yourself and prolonging your ability to buy a house. So if you have questions, you can always send me an email. Myself and my team, we're happy to answer questions and customize a plan for you so you can become a homeowner one day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.